Both Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed Shadows have been taking parallel paths from one issue to the next. For Ubisoft, it's been talks of buyouts, underperforming high-dollar releases, and cancellations, while Shadows has seen its fair share of delays, historical faux pas, and questionable design choices. But the pressure could not be higher on both. Shadows can't just be another middling release. Not from Ubisoft's bread-and-butter franchise, especially with everything taking place. I mean, the pressure could not be higher. The stakes could not be greater. And after 4 hours with their upcoming release, I've got to say, things are not looking good. Shout out to Ubisoft for giving me access to this early playtest, and I wanted to say this up front. This is not a sponsored video. I was not flown anywhere. I was not comped anything. I didn't get a swag bag, and instead, I got to experience about 4 hours of this game from the comfort of my home studio. Now, before we dive really into the depths of Shadows, I first wanted to say this. I'm a huge Assassin's Creed fan. I mean, I've played every mainline title since 2007, including Liberation and Freedom Cry, and some of my fondest memories of these games include just getting home from school, throwing down my backpack, popping in a microwave pizza, and living out some incredible memories through the eyes of the likes of Altair, Desmond, Ezio, and the Kenways. I'm a purist at heart. I love those older titles, and I've tended to struggle with the reboots as they've leaned far too heavy into the Warriors Creed mentality, and it's through that outlook and experience with the franchise that I took on Shadows, and I've got a lot to say about this one. In case you're new here, take a moment to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell to receive my upload alerts. Reviews are not that common here on my channel, but when I do get the chance, I really try to bring in as much perspective as possible. And with that, let's check out Assassin's Creed Shadows. First things first, I'm going to make a huge assumption that someone somewhere within Ubisoft corporate had the intelligence and wherewithal to phone ahead to Ubisoft Quebec, the studio behind Shadows, and say something to the tune of, "Hey, this is Yves Guillemot, the embattled CEO of Ubisoft. Anyways, Tencent's trying to buy our asses out. In fact, things are looking pretty shit here at UBHQ, so I really need you to pull out all the stops with this upcoming Shadows playtest." And then Ubisoft Quebec answers back like, "You got it, boss. We'll show the very best our game has to offer." Because with everything currently ongoing with Ubisoft, which has all been well documented, Ubisoft really has nothing other than Shadows to push to market in 2025. Shadows has to be a banger, blowing completely off the Richter scale, or else they are more than likely going to be easy prey for a corporate takeover, if they aren't already. Anyways, here's the rub. At no time during my 4 hours with Shadows did I ever get the sense that this was a studio-saving savior Ubisoft was hoping for. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And I'm just going to be honest here, but by hour 4, I was yawning. Anyways, let's start at the top, and probably for me, the most exciting twist in our entire 4-hour playtest was this very brief tour we got of the Animus hub, where we got to see all the previous titles kind of laid out in this timeline. The voice of the Animus was talking to us, almost speaking in riddles, foreshadowing something big and interesting that was tied to this system with rewards for previous timelines and such. I mean, there's clues here to unlock, challenges to complete, and I'd honestly love to know a lot more about this aspect. For instance, how the older games are going to be tied to this new hub. Are we going to be diving into, say, Assassin's Creed 4 with Edward Kenway? And in that case, will this challenge be a vertical slice of that game within this Animus? Or do we need to own Black Flag and actually be diving full on into the game to take part in these tasks? Here I have so many questions about this aspect of what we were shown, but unfortunately, we were there and out in what felt like a few minutes. This next led us over to the prologue, which Ubisoft has requested that I do not show you, but it was used as a tutorial and it felt very disjunct, how it jumped back and forth from the timelines of Yasuke over to Naoe. The writing and pacing just seemed to be all over the place. And then, just like that, we were pushed over into the main slices they had prepared for us to best showcase Assassin's Creed Shadows. And here's my first issue, because what we were shown, it honestly didn't do anything to hook me in. It was these portions of missions and little glimpses at some of the in-game mechanics, and much like the prologue, it felt disjunct. And it was here at about hour 1.5 to say 2 hours in that I really started to have doubts as to what Shadows could actually deliver. If this was indeed the all-star lineup and the very best Quebec had cooked up for the playtesters, remember that assumed phone call from corporate to kind of pull out all the stops and to show off the very best in Assassin's Creed Shadows, well, what I had seen up to this point had done little to impress me. Anyways, let's get into the playtest, and to set a bit of context here for you, for me, and remember, I'm a AC purist at heart, I really feel that Assassin's Creed is at its best and it's working at its finest when it's utilizing 6 key components. You've got historical elements and events like recognizable landmarks, historical figures, a strong narrative and plot, exploration, side content, and movement, which is comprised of 3 elements: combat, parkour, and stealth. So we might as well start at the top, and let's talk about historical elements and events. And instantly I think back to Unity and say the Notre Dame Cathedral, or AC3 as we fought alongside George Washington at Bunker Hill. Origins had all sorts of sites like the pyramids, and Odyssey was quite literally a historical playground, and I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting for Shadows to show me something, anything that I would recognize. A famous temple, maybe a landmark, maybe even something that is known around the world like Mount Fuji. Anything to tie this game to the real world, and it never goes there. So scratch that off the list. Now, what I did see was beautiful, and the environments, the villages, the complexes, along with the countryside were all gorgeous, and the art team definitely deserves the recognition. But beyond the beauty of what I was seeing, that was it. It was superficial. And as I traveled from area to area, they all started to look the same. Remember, this playtest was only 4 hours long, and it just led me to suffer from something I'm going to coin here as familiarity fatigue. Oh, look, another complex, another castle, another temple that looks like the first 3 I was just at. The same goes much the same with historical figures and how they're introduced and interlaced into the framework of Shadows. And this is one aspect of this game that I knew Ubisoft would suffer with, because we as gamers suffer from a general lack of understanding overall of Japanese history. Just take, for instance, a character you meet very early on, Oda Nobunaga, who was littered throughout your time with Shadows. He's a real historical figure who launched a war against the other daimyo in the 1500s in an attempt to unify Japan, but that fact is basically hidden because of the way this game sets it up. It isn't like you're running into Leonardo in AC2 or Charles Dickens in Syndicate or even Blackbeard in AC4, which are all easily recognized. They have instant name recognition, and overall they're well known. And because of this general lack of really knowing what's going on, who the key players are, and what their motivations will be, you are met with this endless conveyor belt of similar sounding, like-minded characters that are quite forgettable and once again lack any ability to tie the game to the real world.
I didn't expect to see you again at Himeji Castle.
Let's skip next to side content, and instantly I start to think about the Homestead missions in AC3, maybe the Leonardo missions in AC2, even those damn puzzles in Unity to unlock the unique cosmetics. Many times, side content in an AC title is as good as or better than the main quest line. These quests are often labors of love, created and crafted by one developer, and such they are unique and interesting, building off of and adding to the general narrative of the game. And sadly, I got to experience none of that with my time in Shadows. You'd think again, if that directive came down from UB Corporate to show us the very best the game had to offer, at least one side mission would be on the menu, and it wasn't. My hope is that side content is there when the game launches, and it's substantial and engaging. One thing I remember very early on from the game director's presentation, which was shown before we dove into the game, was a section about exploration and how the game has been modeled to make the players use our eyes way more than in the past, moving us away from POIs that were vomited onto the map in bulk. It was to be built on a series of clues, look in this region, check in this area, and honestly the clues are very basic and you can easily find your targets just using them, but the whole idea here was to give players a general starting point and then to allow them to organically find their way through the storyline, taking advantage of Shadow's new scout system. Now on paper, it sounds immersive and assists in world building. Essentially, you were making allies in regions, building up your own dojo, and use those alliances to build up your informational arsenal. But in practice, it's a menu-driven process of placing your cursor over a region with a question mark, pressing a button, and it essentially pings the area, returning some feedback, and if you happen to ping the right POI, it may even lead to the next area in the mission you were currently on. If not, just stay on the map, move to the next POI, and ping that one. Of course, with a currency system in place to replenish your scout uses. At no time did I ever feel like this was actually needed in the game. I mean, it doesn't lend itself to building up any sort of mechanics or propping up immersion within the context of Shadows other than adding another layer of economy to the map. It's just further drawing it out. Shadows has taken the older map design of question marks all over the place and covered it up with an overlay, now sending you to those locations or sending out your scouts to uncover them. In fact, while we're on the topic of items that were probably not needed in the game, there's again a number and stat-driven gear system here at work. More crit damage, more health regen, that sort of thing as you move up incrementally in gear score. But the changes are so minute, it again begs the question why the hell this seems to find its way back into another Assassin's Creed game. I would have overall preferred to see character-altering changes over incremental stats. Things like Yasuke gains 25% parkour speed and stealth when he's wearing this piece of armor at the expense of some overall health. Something like that. But instead, we see gear scores, we see character levels, we see progression and other items that I feel could have taken those resources and they would have been better spent more efficiently in other areas of the game. Ubisoft still hasn't learned the lesson that sometimes less is more, and instead they continue to dabble in half-baked mechanics like skill points and gear stats. So far, I've not been very complimentary about Shadows, and unfortunately, that trend is going to continue into narrative and plot. And of all the aspects of Shadows, this, along with combat, concern me the most. You see, every mission is bookended with these long cutscenes, and in general, Shadows is very cutscene intense. And this puts a tremendous amount of pressure on both the writing and narrative teams, and I've got to be honest here, they did not deliver. The voice acting is kind of hit or miss, as sometimes you've got these supercharged emotional levels that are not quite matching the setting, if you know what I mean. But the worst part of all is just the basic writing. It's pretty bad.
I don't believe we've met. I am Lord Konishi Yukinaga.
I'm Naue. What brings you to Harima, Lord Yukinaga?
Now, in my 4 hours with Shadows, I get the point that both Yasuke and Naue are unified in their quest for revenge. But after that, every single interaction I had with NPCs or main storyline characters is just so damn forgettable. Now, just kind of switching gears here, I've recently been playing through Cyberpunk again. And in contrast, those conversations and characters are so vivid. Jackie, Judy, Pan Am, Johnny. You know the names and you remember the convos because of the intensity of the writing, how it flows, and how those characters actually interact with you. Shadows carries none of that weight, and instead you pass from one lifeless and unforgettable NPC over to the next. I felt this would have been a great opportunity also to kind of blend in some present world experiences, to pull us out of the Animus to do something, anything. I don't know, maybe to take on Abstergo, to chase down another piece of Eden. Maybe that's coming in the full release, but I'm thinking, and my gut's telling me, don't hold your breath. Okay, last piece of this breakdown, and this has to be the most concerning aspect of Shadows, at least to me, and it has everything to do with movement. Now, Quebec has decided to go opposite ends of the spectrum here between Yasuke and Nawe, with Yasuke serving as your 20-pound sledgehammer, seeing every task as a nail, versus the much more surgically precise Nawe, who's your stealthy shinobi. Now, every time I was given the option, I chose Nawe. And by the way, when a story mission starts, or maybe you're just out in the open world, you can easily switch between the two, which I do appreciate. And sometimes, by the way, that is required. For instance, when you need to scale a temple to reach a sync point, and only Nawe can do so because she's the only one equipped with a grappling hook. Also, for me, combat in general feels a bit too floaty and way too disconnected. It uses a basic parry system coupled with guard breaks, and at times, the amount of incoming attacks being thrown your direction doesn't match your ability sets. As say you're trying to dodge attacks you can't parry, while you've got medium distance enemies just hurling and spamming daggers and firing weapons in your direction. I guess what I'm trying to say is, maybe back in 2015 this would be okay, but now with combat heavy titles really setting the bar high, everything in Shadows in terms of combat feels dated and janky. Stealth is okay, I guess, again, if you select Nawe, because Yasuke doesn't handle this at all with grace. He's more built for just crashing through doorways and 1v1ing every living thing in sight. The ability to go prone has also been added into Shadows, giving you even more stealth options, again, when using Nawe. And in general, I found the entire game just seems to work and play much better with Nawe, as she can absolutely go 1v1 an elite or even take on mobs, but she can also take advantage of the stealth side of being a shinobi, making assassinations a real threat in your arsenal to anyone you can actually reach. Now, sadly, parkour is much the same, as Yasuke is severely limited here as well. He can climb more obvious structures, but does so with all the grace of a loaded down cement mixer, and as I look back on it again now, I question why Yasuke is even needed in this game. I mean, if Nawe can deliver the quintessential Assassin's Creed experience, why is the Wrecking Ball Samurai with a severely limited scope even here? But I guess I would like to say overall, there were some interesting movements, especially to Nawe, and moment-to-moment combat is to be had here, and more on this coming up. Because here's my final question, the obvious question, and probably the question you're all asking about Shadows, and of course it has to do with the present day we gamers currently live in. You see, we have so many samurai shinobi options on the market that frankly do combat on a much more polished level than Shadows. You've got Sekiro, Rise of Ronin, and probably the biggest comparison out there, Ghost of Tsushima, which all deliver this experience on a much more polished level than AC Shadows can. And, you know, maybe if this game was coming out, say, 10 years ago instead of something like AC Syndicate, yeah, we're talking a different story here, because at that point, Shadows would stand uncontested. But since the game seems to only dabble in basic systems like upgrades and exploration, while just completely nixing others like historical set-piece moments and trying to tie us to memorable figures of the past, the only thing we're left with Shadows is combat, which is probably why you're seeing all these clips pop up. This is what combat looks like in Shadows. Check out parkour in Shadows. Of course, never showing you Yasuke. Or check out the brutality of executions in Shadows. Again, this is what Ubi decided to really lean into with the hands-on test, and I expect overall with Shadows. And it has to do with combat, and it really did very little to sell the game to an AC purist like me. And like I said, there are titles currently on the market that can absolutely shred Shadows if combat is all you're looking for. That being said, it says Assassin's Creed on the box. That carries weight, it has cachet, and it has a shinobi on the cover. And along with Ubi's shift over to these giant open world made for the masses combat titles, it's probably still going to sell fairly well. For instance, as much as I did not connect with Valhalla, it seems to have set all sorts of records for Ubisoft, and they're not numb to that fact. But yeah, there you go, my initial thoughts and impressions of Assassin's Creed Shadows. I really got to see a lot of kind of middling combat that looked dated, along with a sprinkling of other mechanics, leaving me overall pretty let down and worried for what happens when this game fully launches to the public. As is the case with these early reviews, these can be highly subjective, and I really encourage you to check out and seek out other reviews and reviewers and see what they had to say about Shadows. But again, for me, this was boring, and I don't see this being that 10 out of 10 experience Ubisoft so desperately needs to stay afloat. Make sure to leave me any feedback you have, and I will of course do my best to respond. If you liked the video, consider hitting subscribe and leaving a rating. All my socials can be found down in the video description. And until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer signing off.